There is a woman in her 50s who lives on the third floor of a quiet apartment building in Osaka. Every morning, at almost exactly 7:40, before the city has fully come alive, she opens her front door and steps into the small tiled space just inside the entrance. She removes her shoes and places them neatly on a narrow wooden rack, with the toes facing outward. Then she slips into a pair of soft indoor slippers, waiting beside it. She does not stop to think about any of this. She does not remind herself. She does not need motivation. She simply walks into the kitchen, reaches for a small cloth hanging beside the sink, and wipes down a counter that already looks clean. The whole thing takes less than a minute. She has repeated this quiet routine almost every morning for more than 30 years. And during all that time, her home has rarely needed what most people would call a deep clean. No lost Saturday. No exhausting weekend spent scrubbing rooms that somehow got out of control again. No standing in the middle of the kitchen, staring at the dishes, the mail, the dusty floor, and wondering where to begin. Now compare that with another home somewhere else in the world. It is Saturday morning. The sink is full. The counter has become a temporary home for unopened mail, shopping bags, chargers, coffee cups, and things that do not belong anywhere. The person standing there already feels tired, and they have not even started cleaning yet. Most people would look at these two homes and assume the difference is discipline. They would say the woman in Osaka is simply cleaner, more organized, or more hardworking. But after living long enough, you begin to notice something. The problem is rarely that people do not care, and it is rarely that they are lazy. Most people do not really have a cleaning problem. They have a decision problem. All day long, they are making small choices. Should I wash this now or later? Should I put this away or leave it here? Should I wipe the counter tonight or deal with it on the weekend? One delayed decision does not look like much, but dozens of them quietly become clutter. Hundreds of them become a home that feels heavier every time you walk into it. The woman in Osaka solved that problem years ago, although she would probably never describe it that way. She did not create a productivity system. She did not study habit science. She simply built a few small actions into the rhythm of her home until there was almost nothing left to decide. And that may be the real secret behind many Japanese homes that seem to stay clean without anyone constantly cleaning them. The answer is not more effort, it is fewer decisions. So what if cleaning less does not begin with a better mop, a stronger spray, or a free Saturday? What if it begins long before you ever pick up a sponge? Before we talk about the Japanese entryway, or Genkan, we need to understand something that most cleaning advice completely misses. A messy home rarely becomes messy all at once. It happens quietly, almost invisibly, not because someone wakes up one morning and decides to stop caring, but because life is full of tiny moments that seem too small to matter. A coffee mug left in the sink because you're running late. A jacket draped over a chair because you'll probably wear it again tomorrow. A piece of mail placed on the counter with the thought, I'll deal with it later. None of these choices feels important. In fact, each one seems perfectly reasonable. The problem is that our brains don't experience them one at a time. They experience them all together. Psychologists often talk about something called decision fatigue. The more choices your brain makes throughout the day, the harder even simple decisions become. By the evening, putting away a pair of shoes or wiping down the kitchen counter can feel like one decision too many. Then there's something even quieter at work: invisible friction. Invisible friction is the tiny resistance hidden inside everyday tasks. It's the few extra seconds it takes to find a place for something, the small amount of effort it takes to wipe a surface now instead of later, the moment your brain says, not now. On its own, that moment means almost nothing. But repeated dozens of times every day, it slowly changes the way your home feels. Think about it this way: one dirty mug isn't stressful. One unopened envelope isn't overwhelming. One pair of shoes left by the couch isn't a problem. But 50 unfinished little things? That's different. Together, they create something much heavier than clutter. They create mental noise. Your eyes see every unfinished task, even if you aren't consciously thinking about it. Without realizing it, your brain keeps a quiet list of everything that still needs attention. That's why some homes feel exhausting before you've done a single chore, not because they're dirty, because they're full of postponed decisions. This is one of the quiet lessons behind many Japanese homes. Instead of relying on motivation to clean a bigger mess later, they quietly remove the tiny moments of friction that create the mess in the first place. And that process begins before you even take your first step inside the house. The first habit begins before you even take your first step into the house. In Japan, it begins with a space called the Genkan. At first glance, it doesn't look like much. It's simply the small entryway where people remove their shoes before entering the rest of the home. Sometimes, it's only a step lower than the living area. Sometimes it's barely large enough for 2 pairs of shoes. But that small space carries a surprisingly big purpose. In Japanese culture, the Genkan isn't just a place to take off your shoes. It's a quiet boundary between 2 different worlds. Outside is everything you can't control: the traffic, the weather, the crowds, the noise, the dirt you collect throughout the day. Inside is where you rest, recover, and begin again. Of course, there's a practical reason for this habit as well. Researchers have found that the bottoms of our shoes can carry hundreds of thousands of bacteria, along with pollen, pesticides, heavy metals, and other contaminants picked up from sidewalks, parking lots, public restrooms, and city streets. Every step you take through your home with outdoor shoes is another opportunity to spread those particles onto your floors. And those floors aren't just something you walk on. Children crawl there, pets sleep there, dust settles there before finding its way back into the air you breathe. So yes, taking your shoes off helps keep a home physically cleaner, but I don't think that's the most interesting part. The real lesson hidden inside the Genkan has less to do with germs and much more to do with human behavior. Behavioral scientists have discovered something remarkably simple. Our environment shapes our actions faster than our motivation ever can. If doing the right thing is easy, obvious, and built into your surroundings, you stop relying on willpower. You simply do it. Think about the woman in Osaka. She doesn't stand at the door every morning asking herself whether she should take off her shoes. There isn't a debate. There isn't a decision. The environment has already made the decision for her. That's what good design does. The cleanest homes aren't built by people with extraordinary discipline. They're built by environments that quietly make the right action effortless. You don't need to renovate your house to borrow this idea. A simple shoe rack beside the door, a small bench, a basket of indoor slippers waiting where you naturally reach for them. Tiny changes like these remove just enough friction that the habit begins to happen almost automatically. And that's exactly how many Japanese habits work. They don't ask you to become a different person. They simply make it easier to become the person you already want to be. Once you've reduced the friction of bringing the outside world into your home, the next habit becomes surprisingly natural. It's a philosophy that many people recognize today from the business world, but long before it was used to improve companies, it was quietly shaping everyday life in Japan. It's called Kaizen. Most people translate Kaizen as continuous improvement, but in a home, it means something much simpler. Small actions, repeated consistently. The mistake many of us make is treating cleaning like an event. We wait until the weekend. We wait until we're finally in the mood. We wait until the mess becomes impossible to ignore. By then, cleaning no longer feels like a simple task. It feels like a project. And that's exactly where our brains begin to resist. One of the things psychologists have learned is that the brain doesn't just avoid hard work. It avoids tasks that feel too big or too undefined. Clean the kitchen. That sounds overwhelming. Put this plate in the dishwasher. That feels easy. The action hasn't changed very much. The feeling has. That's why one of the simplest expressions of Kaizen is often called the 2-minute rule. If something takes less than 2 minutes, do it the moment you notice it. Wipe the stove after cooking. Hang up your jacket instead of dropping it over a chair. Put yesterday's mail where it belongs instead of letting it become today's pile. None of these actions feels important. That's exactly why they work. They're so small that your brain has almost nothing to argue with. And something interesting happens once you begin. One completed action naturally leads to another. You rinse the coffee mug, then you wipe the sink, then you straighten the dish towel. Not because you forced yourself to clean, because momentum quietly took over. It's much like pushing a heavy bicycle. The hardest part isn't keeping it moving, it's getting it moving. A home works the same way. Every tiny action prevents tomorrow's larger problem. Every small reset keeps disorder from gathering enough weight to become overwhelming. Over time, these moments stop feeling like chores. They simply become part of the rhythm of your day. And that's the real purpose of Kaizen. The goal isn't cleaning. The goal is never allowing cleaning to become a project in the first place. Because once that happens, something else begins to change. Not just your home, but the way your mornings feel. The third habit is called Soji. On the surface, it looks like a simple morning cleaning routine. But if you ask someone who has practiced it for years, they'll probably tell you it doesn't feel like cleaning at all. It feels like beginning. The roots of Soji go back centuries to Zen Buddhist temples, where monks cleaned their living spaces every morning, not because the rooms had become dirty overnight, but because cleaning was never only about the room. It was a way of preparing the mind before preparing for the day. That idea quietly lives on in many Japanese homes. A typical morning Soji doesn't take very long. Open a window and let fresh air move through the house. Make the bed as soon as you get up. Wipe the kitchen counter. Straighten the living room. Give the bathroom sink a quick wipe. 15 minutes is often enough. To an outsider, it might look like a list of chores, but something much deeper is happening. You're not simply cleaning your home. You're sending your brain a message. This day begins in order. Our surroundings speak to us long before we notice them. When you wake up to a made bed, a clear kitchen counter, and a room that feels settled, your brain isn't greeted by unfinished business. It's greeted by clarity. Researchers have found that visual clutter competes for our attention, even when we're not consciously focused on it. Every unfinished task quietly asks for a little piece of your mental energy. A reset environment removes much of that invisible noise before your workday has even begun. And that changes more than your house. It changes how you enter your day. You don't walk out the door already carrying yesterday's unfinished decisions. You leave with the feeling that something important has already been completed. It's a surprisingly small shift, but over weeks and months, it begins to shape something even more valuable than a cleaner home. It shapes your identity. You stop thinking of yourself as someone who is constantly trying to catch up. Instead, you become someone who quietly resets life before it has the chance to fall behind. And perhaps that's why Soji has survived for generations, not because people enjoy cleaning, but because they enjoy the calm that comes after those first 15 intentional minutes. The fourth habit is called Danshari. At first, it sounds like another word for decluttering. But the longer you spend with the idea, the more you realize it isn't really about getting rid of things. It's about protecting your attention. The word Danshari is built from three simple ideas: refuse what you don't need, let go of what no longer serves you, and separate yourself from the emotional weight that unnecessary possessions quietly carry. Many people first encountered this way of thinking through Marie Kondo. Her question, "Does it spark joy?" became famous around the world, but Danshari reaches even deeper. It asks a different question. What is this object asking from me every single day? Because every object, whether we realize it or not, asks our brain for something. Should I keep it? Should I move it? Should I organize it? Should I clean it? Should I repair it? Should I finally use it? One object doesn't matter very much. But now imagine 100 of them, or 500. Without realizing it, your brain is quietly answering those tiny questions every time your eyes move around the room. Psychologists sometimes call this attention residue. A small part of your attention stays attached to unfinished decisions, even while you're trying to focus on something completely different. That's why visual clutter feels surprisingly exhausting. Not because your house is dirty, because your mind never gets a chance to fully rest. Every unused exercise machine in the corner, every drawer filled with things, just in case. Every hobby you gave up years ago but still keep on the shelf, they're doing more than taking up physical space. They're quietly borrowing a little piece of your mental energy every single day. This is one reason many Japanese homes often feel calm even when they're quite small. The goal isn't to own as little as possible. The goal is to own with intention. Every object earns its place. Every object has a purpose. And because there are fewer unnecessary decisions waiting in every room, the home feels lighter, not only to clean, but to live in. You don't have to empty your closets overnight. In fact, Danshari works best when it's practiced gently. This week, walk through your home with one simple question. What in this room asks something from me every time I see it? You may be surprised that the heaviest things in your home aren't the largest ones. They're the objects that quietly carry years of postponed decisions. And letting go of one of them isn't really about creating more space in your house. It's about creating more space in your mind. The fifth habit isn't really a habit at all. It's a different way of seeing your home. There's a long-standing idea in Japanese culture that the condition of your home reflects your inner life. It's a beautiful thought, but it can easily be misunderstood. It doesn't mean that a messy home makes you a messy person. Life happens. People get busy. Children leave toys everywhere. Work gets overwhelming. None of that says anything about your worth. The deeper idea is much gentler than that. Your environment quietly influences how you feel, whether you notice it or not. Think about the last time you walked into a beautiful hotel before anyone spoke to you. Before you even put your suitcase down, you probably felt yourself take a deeper breath. Now think about walking into a peaceful Airbnb tucked away in the mountains or by the ocean. The room is simple. The light is soft. There isn't much there. Yet, almost immediately, your shoulders begin to relax. Now imagine opening the door to a cluttered garage. Boxes stacked everywhere. Things piled on top of each other. No clear place to walk. Nothing about you has changed. But your mood probably has. That's the quiet power of an environment. It speaks before anyone says a word. And your home is having that conversation with you every single day. Every room is gently asking one question. How do you want to feel while you're here? A peaceful home doesn't guarantee a peaceful mind, but it makes peace easier to find. In many Western cultures, cleaning is often treated like a chore to get through, something you postpone until you have enough time or energy. In Japan, Many of these small rituals carry a different meaning. They're acts of care, not for the house alone, but for the people who live inside it. Wiping the kitchen counter isn't only about removing crumbs. It's a quiet way of saying, this space matters. Making your bed isn't about impressing anyone. It's about giving yourself one completed beginning before the rest of the day begins making demands. Taking your shoes off at the door isn't simply about keeping dirt outside. It's about leaving a little of the outside world behind before you step into the place where you're meant to rest. Perhaps that's the real lesson hidden inside these 5 habits. A home isn't just where you live. It's one of the places that quietly teaches you how to feel. And when you care for it a little each day, it has a remarkable way of caring for you in return. If you've been listening closely, you may have noticed something interesting. None of the 5 habits we've talked about today is particularly impressive on its own. Taking off your shoes, wiping a counter, making your bed, owning a little less, spending 15 quiet minutes resetting your home. None of those actions feels life-changing, and that's exactly why most people underestimate them. We tend to believe that big improvements come from big efforts. A weekend spent deep cleaning, a complete home makeover, a burst of motivation that finally gets everything organized. But real change rarely arrives that way. More often, it arrives so quietly that you don't even notice it's happening. One small reset today, another tomorrow, a few more next week. Individually, they seem almost too ordinary to matter. Together, they begin to create something remarkably powerful. This is what many people call the compound effect. Small actions, repeated consistently, eventually produce results that feel much larger than the effort required to create them. Think about brushing your teeth. No single brushing changes your health. Skipping it once probably doesn't either. But repeat either habit for 10 years, and the difference becomes impossible to ignore. A home works the same way. Every time you take off your shoes at the door, every time you wipe the counter before going to bed, every time you put one object back where it belongs, you're making a tiny investment in tomorrow's peace of mind. None of those moments asks very much from you, but together, they quietly become a completely different way of living. One day, you suddenly realize something. Your weekends feel lighter. Your mornings begin more calmly. You spend less time cleaning because there's simply less to clean. Not because you became a more disciplined person, but because your small habits never allowed disorder to grow into something overwhelming. That's the quiet beauty of these Japanese habits. They don't promise dramatic overnight transformation. They simply ask for a little consistency, and over months and years. Consistency has a remarkable way of accomplishing what motivation never could. A peaceful home is rarely built in a single afternoon. It's built in hundreds of tiny moments that hardly seem important at the time, until one day you look around and realize you're living in a completely different home than the one you used to come back to. Now, here's something I'd encourage you not to do. Don't try to change all 5 habits tonight. That's usually how good intentions turn into abandoned projects. Instead, try something much smaller. Think of it as a 3-night experiment. No pressure, no perfect routine. Just 3 evenings, and a little curiosity. On the first night, choose your kitchen. Before you go to bed, spend just a few minutes resetting it. Wash the dishes. Wipe the counter. Put away the things that don't belong there. Nothing more. On the second night, do the same thing with your bathroom. Clear the sink. Fold the towel. Put away the products you've left out. Again, don't aim for perfection. You're simply creating a fresh starting point for tomorrow morning. On the third night, move to your entryway. Straighten your shoes. Clear anything that's collected by the door. If you have indoor slippers, place them where they'll be waiting for you. If not, simply make the entrance feel welcoming. Then stop. Don't add another room. Don't turn it into a weekend cleaning marathon. Instead, pay attention to something much more interesting. The next morning, ask yourself one simple question. Which space changed how I felt the most? Not which room looked the cleanest. Which one felt the lightest? Which one made you take a deeper breath without even realizing it? Because that's what these Japanese habits have been quietly teaching all along. A peaceful home isn't created by doing everything. It's created by doing the small things consistently enough that they begin changing the way you experience the space around you. Sometimes, the biggest transformation begins with a corner of your kitchen, or a clean bathroom sink, or a pair of shoes waiting neatly by the door. The point isn't that these places become perfect. The point is that, little by little, they begin welcoming you home instead of reminding you what still needs to be done. That's a feeling worth noticing. And once you've experienced it, it's surprisingly hard to go back. Before we leave, I'd like you to think once more about the woman in Osaka. Tomorrow morning, at almost exactly the same time, she'll quietly open her front door. She'll take off her shoes, slip into her slippers, wipe the kitchen counter, straighten a few things that hardly seem worth mentioning, and then she'll go on with the rest of her day. She probably won't think of it as a routine. She won't think of it as a productivity system. She certainly won't think she's following 5 habits from a YouTube video. To her, it's simply what it means to care for a home. Not all at once, not only when it becomes a mess, but a little at a time, every single day. And perhaps that's what we've been missing all along. Maybe the cleanest homes aren't created by people who love cleaning. Maybe they're created by people who quietly protect tomorrow, one small decision at a time. Every pair of shoes placed by the door, every counter wiped before bed, every object returned to where it belongs. None of those moments feels important. Until one day, you realize they were quietly shaping the life you were living. Because in the end, these habits were never really about spotless floors or perfectly organized shelves. They were about creating a place that asks a little less from you. A place that welcomes you home instead of reminding you how much still needs to be done. A place where your mind can finally slow down, where your shoulders relax, where you can simply breathe. And maybe that's what all of us are really looking for. Not a perfect home, just one that makes life feel a little lighter. A peaceful home isn't something you earn after hours of exhausting work. It's something you build, a few quiet minutes at a time. Before you leave, I'd like to ask you for one small favor. Not for me, for yourself. Don't try all 5 habits tonight. In fact, I hope you don't. Real change almost never begins that way. Instead, choose the habit that feels almost too small to matter. Maybe it's taking your shoes off at the door. Maybe it's wiping the kitchen counter before bed. Maybe it's putting just one object back where it belongs. Whatever it is, do only that. Tonight. Then tomorrow morning, before you check your phone, before you open your email, before the day begins asking anything from you. Pause for just a moment. Walk into that space and notice something most people never stop to notice. How does your home make you feel? Not how clean it looks, not whether it's perfect. How does it feel? Do you breathe a little deeper? Does the room feel quieter? Does your mind feel just a little less crowded? Sometimes, the smallest habits don't change what your home looks like. They change what coming home feels like. If you try this little experiment, I'd genuinely love to hear what happened. Come back tomorrow and tell us which small habit you chose, and whether it changed the way your home welcomed you. Because that's how lasting change usually begins. not with one big decision, but with one small action, repeated until it quietly becomes part of who you are. If this video gave you a new way of thinking about your home, we'd love to have you here for the next one. Here at Inside Japanese Living, we explore the quiet habits, timeless ideas, and everyday wisdom that have helped generations of Japanese families create calmer homes and more peaceful lives. Until next time, take care of your home a little today, and tomorrow, it just might take care of you.